My name is Sarah Henry, the host of The Activist Lawyer, offering a platform for lawyers to share their story and journey into law and activism. Guests will discuss the challenges and highlights of their work, as well as important cases, opinions on legal and political matters, and will offer advice and tips for anyone interested in pursuing a career in human rights law, public interest law, or criminal justice, among others. So tune in and engage with us, and please share and review where possible so we can keep bringing you insightful episodes featuring fantastic guests. In today's episode, I am joined by Roman Shortall, who is a practising solicitor and co-founder of independent Irish news platform The Ditch. He won Newcomer of the Year at the Law Society of Ireland Justice Media Awards 2023 for his work exposing wrongdoing at Ireland's state planning body. For the past year, he's collaborated with investigative news outlets across the globe to uncover the flow of weapons to Israel. So I've been really looking forward to interviewing Roman for some time now, and I think today's interview is very timely. It's very important. It both answers many questions and also leaves us thinking about many questions yet to be answered. I'll let you listen in. This is also a fantastic opportunity to look at the intersection of journalism and the law. So it will be really appealing from that perspective to many of our listeners. There's some excellent, concrete and tangible examples of the two areas working together. We talk a lot about what's happening at the moment in terms of Ireland and Palestine, as well as the flotilla that is currently topical at the moment. So I hope you enjoy today's episode, and as always, please share and review where possible. Thank you. Hello everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Activist Lawyer podcast. I am delighted to be joined by solicitor and investigative journalist Roman Shortall. Roman, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks very much for having me, Sarah.
So you're here at a pivotal moment, I suppose, and we're going to discuss lots of content around your work and obviously get your thoughts on issues that have been arising, legal matters that we'll go into. But just before we get into the content of today's interview and a little bit more about your work, you have built a career as both a lawyer and a journalist. So could you maybe walk us through your journey into both professions? What first attracted you to this work, and how are the two areas compatible, if at all?
Yeah, so initially, about say nearly 20 years ago now, I just did a certificate in business and law and basically got into working as a legal executive. And I think at around that time, my dad had basically a career change and went off and started studying law himself, and kind of, encouraged me to get into it, and knew that I always kind of find that a lot of people that are interested in law were interested in history at school. And that's what I was interested in. I wasn't particularly good at any other subjects, or didn't really have much of an interest, and had a terrible leaving certificate and everything, and didn't particularly like school either, but was very interested in history, and would have been reading books about history and politics from a very young age. And probably I'd say I started getting interested in politics from when I was around 12 or 13. And I suppose then I had that interest, and my dad was always encouraging me to study law. He said, I think you'd really enjoy it. So all I did was a certificate. I got into working as a legal executive, and life got in the way. I started a family, kids, everything, and just never got round to actually qualifying as a solicitor until last year. So what I did was I went back to college. I went to Griffith College, did a law degree, and then qualified as a solicitor through England and Wales, because I'm sure you might know the system for qualification over there changed, and it's a little bit more, it's not perfect, it's far from perfect, but it's a little bit more accessible now to qualify as a solicitor over there. So I qualified through England and Wales, and then was able to passport the qualification over here in Ireland. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. But then, while I was studying for the degree, I started to get into journalism and investigative journalism. And I suppose, like, one of the other things, being interested in history, the big part of history is research. And I've always loved research and just digging into things. And even the area of law that I worked in was public law, and very specifically was judicial review, administrative law. And a lot of that as well, is very carefully digging through legislation. And there's even, there is an element of, particularly when crosses over with constitutional law. There is that kind of element of history in it. And, even we look at kind of how common law develops and, precedents in court and things like that, that's all history and that's part of history. So I've always had that interest in digging and looking into things. And basically myself and my colleague, Owen McNeil, the other co-founder at The Ditch, we just, we felt that there was, this is about 5 years ago nearly, we kind of felt that there was this gap in the market really, where I think there was a very good culture of investigative journalism in Ireland in the 70s and the 80s up to the 90s. But then I think what happened was that business decisions were made by media organisations, that putting money towards these resources that are required, because it's very labour intensive, obviously, that it's not a commercially sensible decision.
Yeah.
Because you could have one journalist spending weeks on one story and, they're not meeting their quotas if they can only get one story out over a period of a couple of weeks. So, we obviously knew that, funding would be a big issue. We were very lucky in that Paddy Cosgrave from Web Summit, or Web Summit itself, because of his politics and his interest in journalism and public interest journalism, that we got funding from Web Summit to get started and to set up The Ditch. Quite difficult at the start. It's hard to kind of break into the media, particularly as a kind of a unorthodox type publication. But I think really that it took a while to kind of take off. We weren't unrealistic. We knew that it would take a while to kind of get going, and you'd need to have a few, I guess, decent enough stories before people would actually take notice.
Very good. So as an investigative journalist, you've tackled stories that many mainstream outlets have avoided, uncovering a range of things from state failures, issues with An Garda Síochána, breaches in child protection, government representatives, and of course the planning authority and other judicial decisions involving state actors. But looking back on your work, is there one kind of piece or one investigation that stands out to you as particularly impactful?
Well, I think the one you just mentioned, looking into On Board Pleanála, the State Planning Authority, I think it had a name change, a revamp now, which not to be immodest, but I think part of the reason for that is the work that we did in uncovering wrongdoing at On Board Pleanála, and I think it's part of an attempt by the government to kind of change its image. But yeah, I think that the work that we did with On Board Pleanála, that was actually, like, to go back to what we were talking about a few moments ago about breaking into, getting people to take notice. That was our big break. So that was in, I think, April 2022. And at that stage, we'd been around for a year. We had mostly been doing stuff on COVID procurement and stories like that. I think we only had a small following on the social media, a couple of thousand followers. And I think this example is actually, it's a really good example of how journalism and law can interact with each other. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about how it all started. It started by me walking into the offices of On Board Pleanála and asking to see their interests register of the board members. And because my area of law is administrative law, I knew, where to look at the Planning and Development Act, and was able to find that there is this register where board members have to declare their interests, and that any member of the public can literally walk in off the street and say, I want to see the register. And when I went in, first of all, they said nobody had ever asked to see the register. So it was up in, a folder up in someone's office. And initially they told me, you'll have to come back. And I said, no, I'm not coming back. I said, you have to show me the register now. And they said, here's the legislation and this is what it says. It has to be available. So, I had to wait for, 40 minutes or whatever. And eventually someone came down, they brought it down, brought me into a room, and they said, you can take photographs of it. And I had a look at it. And I mean, just the reason that we wanted to look at it was that there was a lot of controversial decisions at the time in On Board Pleanála. And there was a lot of there were a lot of rumours going around that, look, there are issues here, but nobody was looking into it. And, I thought, well, that's a good place to start, is what interests do these board members have? And what kind of led on from that was 6 months of, I think maybe over 24 stories that we did on Board Pleanála, and the various different breaches of the kind of ethics legislation and rules surrounding board members. And some of it was incredible. We had, a board member who was making decisions concerning land beside land that he had an interest in. Yeah. We had board members who were adjudicating on applications concerning houses that were 100 metres from where they lived, all of which wasn't permitted by the Code of Conduct. And eventually the mainstream media, to be fair, actually, the Irish Examiner picked up on the story very quickly. And I think if they didn't, I don't know if it would have taken off the way it did. Mm. So to be fair to the Irish Examiner, they were very quick to get in on the action, basically. Yeah. So, 6 months of stories, multiple investigations were announced with the senior counsel then that came in, to look at what was going on. And eventually the deputy chairperson resigned and was criminally prosecuted and convicted. Yeah. Was, I believe, as far as I recall, given a suspended sentence of 2 months. Oh. And so that was our big break. Yeah. That was when people started to actually notice who the bitch was.
And did she know? And that piece of work also uncovered the role the judiciary play in such matters. The activist judges was a term that was floating around as well. You really delved into that piece too. How did that kind of influence the outcome?
I think, in terms of all of the legal cases that kind of flowed on from this, I agree, that aspect was very interesting, where you had, you have basically, you're publishing these stories, okay, and they actually concern decisions that have been made, and concern maybe very large developments, or concern developments where there were genuine objections for various different reasons, environmental reasons. And you had a situation where there were people, you would talk to people that kind of knew, okay, something isn't right here. Why is this getting through? Or why did this board member ignore what the inspector said? What happened then was you just had this avalanche of judicial review proceedings on foot of our stories. And in fact, our work is cited in 2 or 3 High Court and Court of Appeal judgments where our work is actually mentioned, and where cases were brought because of what we revealed. Decisions were quashed by the courts. I kind of got the impression from reading some of the judgments, that particularly from Judge Humphreys, that I think the courts appreciated that a light was shone on what was going on in On Board Pleanála, and that someone was looking into this as to why you had all these very unusual decisions that were being made. So, I think it's a really good case study of how journalism and law interact with each other, but also then how those stories that you publish actually turn into very important legal cases.
Yeah. And the core of our podcast is always looking at activism and the law and how it makes impactful change. And that, you throw in the journalism and the investigative piece there, is a really good concrete example of that. Just moving on to some of your other work, I know you've been heavily engaged around what's happening in Palestine. and especially in light of obviously the ongoing genocide in Gaza. How have you been able to bring your kind of legal and journalistic background to bear in kind of this area of solidarity and advocacy, because you have been very vocal?
Yeah, so I mean, about a year ago, we started looking into the use of Irish airspace, and the use as well of Shannon Airport by the military, to a lesser extent by the US military. We got lucky, basically. That's what happened. We got very lucky in that. Purely by chance, I came across an article in French, and I don't speak French, but I came across this article by pure coincidence when I was looking into the flow of munitions to Israel. And what I discovered was that Liège Airport in Belgium was being used as a hub to transport weapons from the United States to Israel. And I clicked onto a video from a news organization in Belgium, and I saw that these flights were going through Irish airspace. And I knew, I can't remember how I knew, but I did know that, we had this munitions of war legislation, and that you needed permission to bring munitions of war through Irish airspace. And I understand, like, there'd be a lot of people that say, well, okay, it's not going to go through Irish airspace, it'll go through someone else's airspace. But what I think people need to understand is that it's not just going through Irish airspace. The Irish State Air Navigation Service is actively assisting these aircraft to come through Irish airspace, because that's their job, to help aircraft navigate through Irish airspace. So that's a positive act of assistance. Mm-hmm. And aside from that, it's a criminal offence to bring munitions of war through Irish airspace. So, I mean, we knew that the government was saying that this isn't happening. And it was they had said it, they were on the Dáil record saying that there's no munitions of war going through Irish airspace or going through Shannon. So I contacted the NGO in Belgium that had gotten these documents, and they had gotten them from the authorities in Belgium. And after a lot of digging, I was able to find out that many of these flights had gone through Irish airspace. And we then asked the department, did they have permission? And the answer was no. And again, it was a case of looking very carefully at the legislation that governs the carriage of munitions of war. And there are multiple pieces of legislation, and there are regulations and orders brought by the minister. And again, I think it's a good example of how it's almost like it's a privilege to understand the law when you're working as a journalist. Yeah. It's a privilege to be able to say, be able to just click into, go onto the Irish Statute Book website or the Law Reform Commission website and be able to look at legislation and say, yeah, I get that. Yeah, you can't bring munitions of war through Irish airspace unless you have permission from the minister. And that's a huge thing, to be able to have that knowledge as a journalist. It's incredible. It's an incredibly powerful tool to have in your arsenal, if you pardon the pun. But it really is. It is. And I actually think that law, I don't think there is such a course, but I would love in the future if you could study law and journalism together. As a degree. Yeah. I think it would be incredible.
Yeah, it's certainly compatible from your stance, and you can see how it actually works in reality. And it is that important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think we've obviously been reporting on this for the past year, and time and time again, all of these stories, they come back to that legislation and to understanding, what licenses and permissions are needed, but also understanding where can you get the evidence that you need for this. Do you know what I mean? I've submitted freedom of information requests myself now to the Belgian authorities. And gotten back the documents and the documentary evidence that's needed, to prove what's going on. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't think, in fact, I'm certain if I didn't have that legal background, that would be extremely difficult.
It might be, yeah. And even just knowing where to look and engaging with colleagues, I suppose, as well around it. But did this prompt you to launch the legal challenge? I know you and a number of your colleagues alongside the campaigning group Uplift did launch a case in the High Court challenging the use of Irish airspace by military flights transporting munitions to Israel. Is that on the back of this? So you've obviously published lots of reports based on your evidence and your finding. How did the High Court case come about, and why is it important to take it to that level?
Yeah, so I mean, we kind of felt that we'd been reporting for kind of, I think at that stage, maybe 5 or 6 months, when we basically had the conversation, well, we're reporting on all of these serious criminality, basically. And the state is not doing anything about it. And all the state has done is they have said that they are examining the allegations. And we've gotten some documents back through Freedom of Information where they're basically having Microsoft Teams calls with these airlines that are accused of serious criminal offences. That's all they're doing. And that's it. And I mean, I made the joke that, like, if you could imagine a situation where the guards are sending an email to the Kinahan cartel and asking them would they like to join a Zoom meeting, because they're looking into their activities. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's really absurd because because we're talking about criminality here. There's no way to kind of, you can call it, you can use words like examination and make it very nice and friendly. But at the end of the day, these airlines are accused of indictable criminal offences that carry sentences of up to 3 years imprisonment. And here you have the Department of Transport saying, let's jump on a Microsoft Teams call to discuss this. And you also have An Garda Síochána refusing to investigate it and saying, no, that's nothing to do with us, even though it's criminal activity and it would be absolutely unprecedented for the Department of Transport to be conducting a criminal investigation, which they aren't doing anyway or won't do. So that's why we took the case, because the state is refusing to do anything. And these flights are continuing. Yeah. These flights are continuing. Even last month, there were F-35 parts being transported through Irish airspace. And they're still allowing it to happen. And they're still coming back with the same response saying, we're looking into it, we'll get back to you after a year. So that's why we took the case. So it's ourselves, it's my colleagues, Paulie Doyle, Owen McNeil, Uplift, and Dr. Ahmed, who's a Palestinian doctor. And we all decided enough is enough, and we're going to challenge the state on this. And we're also going to challenge them on the the licenses to export dual use goods to Israel, which we've also reported on. And I think we all know that dual use goods in 99% of cases means military use. But it's just a fancy term used to cover up the fact that these goods are going to be put into weapons.
Sugarcoating criminality. Wow. Well, where are we with the case then? Is there anything you can share in terms of status or?
Yeah, so we the courts were very accommodating on the last day before the break. Judge Bulger heard us out basically, and I think the case is coming before her or before the courts on the 11th of November, I think. And I think we've been asked to put the state on notice before the application for leave is heard. So we're hopeful. As I said, we should be back before the courts in the next month. Right. And we'll take it from there. So it's, as you know, like with judicial review, it's a two-stage process. Yeah. We need to get leave first. We've put a lot of evidence on in our exhibits in terms of what's happening. So we'll see what happens. And, we're willing to go the whole way with the case. To kind of, the whole point of it is to force the government to take action, basically, to force the government actually to make these airlines comply with law.
As
basically.
Basic
That's
as that.
all. It's nothing. As basic as that is. There's nothing. Anybody could take this case, whether they were on the left of the political spectrum or the right of the political spectrum. Exactly. It's a case where if you believe in the rule of law, then it should apply to these airlines as well. And they shouldn't be allowed, whether or not even if you're pro-Israel or whatever, the law has been broken.
The law's been broken.
So if that's what you aspire to living in a society where the law applies equally to everyone, well, then surely you should get behind this case,
Exactly. Well, look, we're all behind it, and it's a really important case. I'm sure it'll get a lot of attention, but as we say, we'll wait and see. But well done to you and your colleagues for taking that step. We're speaking today just merely a couple of days since reports emerged of the IDF and the Israeli Navy attacking and arresting citizens, global citizens and activists aboard the Global Sumid Flotilla. I'm sure everybody listening is familiar with this, although the news isn't really covering it in extensive detail. Surprise, surprise. But it's clearly an act that is in breach of international law on many, many levels. I'm just keen to know your view, Roman, because we're talking at a time when this is very, very live. Why are countries not getting behind the activists and the civilians aboard this flotilla that is bringing humanitarian aid to Gaza, but of course is drawing attention to the siege? In your opinion, how have we failed to protect humanitarian missions like this? And what does it say about the current state of international accountability as a whole? It's appalling.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of factors in why we've basically thrown international law out the window, I think. And, I think this idea of a rules-based order, I think for a lot of people, the myth has been exposed now. And, it's quite clear that international law, as far as, Western governments are concerned, does not apply to Israel. They get a pass on it. And what you've seen with the flotilla, if you look even at the reporting on it and the words that are being used by a lot of Western leaders talking about, people being detained and people being processed and all this sort of language, what we saw was effectively an act of piracy. People were kidnapped by the IDF. And some people seem to take issue with this idea that they were kidnapped. They were kidnapped. The Israeli army has no authority in international waters. They've no authority to come to be armed in international waters and to come on board and kidnap people. And I think the Irish government's response, I think, is incredible. And I'm not naive, but I thought, God, you've an Irish person who was elected to the Seanad, Chris Andrews, has been kidnapped, presumably at gunpoint, and has been illegally brought, I presume, to Israel to be detained in a prison over there. I just couldn't believe it. Now, I'm not naive. We know Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's disdain for Sinn Féin and the fact that they participate in, the democratic process of running for election and so on. But from my point of view, I'm obviously, I'm on the left, okay? That's very clear, and the Ditch is a left publication. Yeah. But I would be equally outraged if Israel, if Chris Andrews was a Fine Gael senator.
Of course, yeah.
I don't think that, I think anybody who really believes in democracy would say, okay, here's somebody, an elected representative, has been kidnapped by a rogue state and transported to their country and is being detained in the prison. And I honestly, despite differences and stuff, I did expect that the Irish government would issue a statement, at least naming Chris Andrews and saying we're extremely concerned that a member of the Oireachtas has been treated in this way. So, I mean, that didn't happen. No. All they've done is they've expressed very mild concern. I think it's just, it's part of this broader free pass that Israel gets on everything, really. Like the European Union, as we've reported, is still allowing weapons to be exported to Israel under the EU-Israel trade agreement. And the question you asked at the start when we were discussing the flotilla, why is this? Basically, why did these kind of rules not apply to Israel, and why has there been this reaction in the international community? And one of the things that I've seen in my research is, and we actually had an event recently with Low Key, the activist and rapper. It was actually an incredibly engaging and informative event. The guy is basically like a walking encyclopedia of, anti-colonialism and stuff like that. He's unreal. But he was talking quite extensively about all these contracts between Israeli weapons companies and tech companies and Western governments. And I think that one of the reasons that Israel has been given a free pass is because so many Western powers rely on companies like Elbit Systems to supply them with defense and military goods. And we actually see that. We actually see the flow in our research of weapons going from, not only weapons going to Israel, but weapons going from Israel to countries in the European Union, to the United States. And a lot of countries, the kind of tools, the IT tools that are used by the military and by police forces in the West are developed in Israel. And I do genuinely think that that's part of it, that there's this fear, well, you know, if we crack down on Israel, are they going to stop allowing these companies to supply us with weapons and weapons technology? And I think it all goes back to the military industrial complex, you know, and I think that's one of the major reasons why Israel, why Israel is effectively being told, you can do as you want, carry on.
And on that, I mean, Ireland is widely viewed, I think it's fair enough to say that. You've given us concrete examples there with your High Court case as well about what Ireland isn't doing in terms of stopping this genocide. But globally, we are viewed as this kind of, I suppose, beacon of solidarity. And I think that has to come from the people. We've seen thousands and thousands take to the streets every week now for 2 years. But why is there such a kind of gap between rhetoric and action when it comes to Ireland? And do you think that's a fair assessment that maybe on the global plane we're viewed as this kind of, you know, our history is always linked to the Palestinian history of colonialism and struggle, which is fair enough. But the government, it's just so frustrating that people view us like that, yet we don't see the action that we need, concrete action, we just see words.
Yeah, and I have to say it becomes quite frustrating when you see, you know, the likes of Simon Harris putting out a statement and, you know, a very strong statement. And as you've said, like Ireland, even the Irish government, the rhetoric has been quite good and a lot better than other EU countries or even Western countries. But it's not matched by actions. And I think actually it's unfortunate that a lot of people who are looking from the outside in, because, you know, they don't make that kind of distinction between the Irish people and the people we have in power, our leaders, who really haven't done much in terms of actions. They just see the big protests. And I guess a lot of people would presume or assume that the government is taking action because of the will of the people. I think it would be fair to say that Ireland is probably the most pro-Palestine country in Europe, but there is this incredible disconnect between what the people want and what the government is doing. 6 or 7 years since the Occupied Territories Bill was introduced to the Dáil, and it still hasn't been passed, and we've a kind of a watered down version of it at the moment that's going through the process at a snail's pace. I don't think the government wants it to pass. And, you know, we've done some reporting on that, and I think it's quite obvious to anyone looking carefully at what's going on that the reason that it hasn't been passed and the reason that we haven't taken any other concrete actions against Israel on a domestic level is because we don't want to upset the United States.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that. It's as clear as day. It was spelled out by the US ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, in an email that was sent that we reported on, I think, last year. And she said, you know, she basically said, look, are you sure you want to pass this? Are you sure you want to do this? We have serious concerns about the Occupied Territories Bill. That's a very nice economy you've got there. You know, it would be a shame if something happened to it. I think that was kind of the attitude that's been taken.
Yeah. And I've heard that attitude expressed by numerous commentators who are not necessarily, I mean, they're pro-Palestine in a sense, but this is something that bothers them for the reasons that you've just mentioned. Roman, I recently saw an interview with you and the journalist Owen Jones, which was fantastic, and it got me thinking about this question that I'd pose about Gaza. I mean, being described, we've seen it as this litmus test for humanity. I know it's a very broad statement, but I always think about it when you start to think of how it reveals things that we didn't know, and the mask is slipping around the world in various kind of political structures. And I'm just wondering how this kind of devastating moment in our history is revealing, what's it revealing with the political structure that we have across the spectrum from left to right, and how, you know, they respond to this disaster, this kind of, I don't know, it's hard to describe what's happening, but it feels like the layers are being peeled back slowly. And I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that in terms of our politics that we're used to.
I think a lot of people have been exposed by it. And I do agree with you. I think it is a litmus test. You know, I can't think of any better litmus test for humanity than asking someone, are you okay with children being shredded to pieces? And you know, are you okay with seeing that every day? Is that okay with you? Do you think there's anything wrong with bombing residential buildings and seeing parents carrying their children's shredded bodies out of those buildings? Is that okay with you? And that's what people are being asked. And a lot of Western politicians, including on the left, or supposedly on the left, which is quite incredible, are saying, yes, that's perfectly fine with me. I don't think Israel is doing anything wrong. And I think you've seen, if you look at like the work of, actually you mentioned Owen Jones, he had an excellent video out, I think today, where he interviews a Labour Party MEP. He confronts him on the street. It's gone viral now. And he says there's genocide in Gaza. And the Labour Party MP says, no. He said, I don't like to use the G word. And like, this is a party that's supposedly of the left. Now, we know, like, that's, if you look at what's going on in the UK at the moment, that clearly isn't. But I mean, I think a lot of liberals have been exposed. I think a lot of people who claim to be human rights champions have been exposed. You know, that when it comes to Israel, they're willing to turn a blind eye and they apply different rules. And I think it has been an incredibly good litmus test for all of those people who claim to cherish human rights, including Keir Starmer, who was a human rights lawyer for a big part of his career.
Astonishing.
Yeah, and is allowing weapons to continue to be sent from the United Kingdom to Israel, and is perfectly happy to continue with that. I think, though, on the other hand as well, because it is such a litmus test, you know, maybe there would have been people before. There's always this question mark over big name activists like Greta Thunberg, whether like, are they the real deal?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, are they really, you know, do they really care, or is this sort of, you know, is there other people in the West kind of backing them, and are they kind of like managing it? And I think we can see now that people like Greta Thunberg are the real deal. They really are the real deal, you know, and that they really do care, and that they don't apply different principles to different situations. No. They're consistent in what they believe in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yes, disheartening, but also heartening in a way that we do see so many people rise up despite smear campaigns against them. But we hope that this situation will develop safely. But Roman, what's next for you, I guess, in your work? Is there anything coming up? And how can listeners follow your work and keep up to date with everything that's going on?
Yeah, so there are actually, there's big plans afoot. I think there's going to be some kind of big announcements. I can't kind of say too much at the moment, but I think the ditch is going to go in a particular direction. And I think there's going to be a lot more what you'd call activist journalism from us. And I hope we'll kind of be making a couple of announcements in the next couple of weeks. Brilliant. About those plans, which I'm really looking forward to. If anyone wants to keep an eye on our work, you can follow us on X. We're on Instagram. we'd really appreciate if you give us a follow on Instagram. We're trying to build up the Instagram at the moment because, as you know, X is becoming quite a difficult platform to operate on, particularly if you're pro-Palestine.
Yeah.
So, keep up the fight, and, we'll keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and thank you for doing what you're doing. It's just been a pleasure to talk to you, Roman, and I look forward to catching up again at some point.
Thank you very much for having me on, Sarah.
Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.